Business has always been about turning a profit, making money. But can it stand for something more? Something beyond dollars and cents? We think so. We think that today, business has a higher calling, a purpose to be fair and just, to do right by their workers, customers, communities, and the environment. And it turns out companies successful doing that also do better for their bottom line. When you see the Just Capital seal, it means this company is a force for good. Visit justcapital.com to learn more.
And good afternoon. We're doing it live right here, weekday afternoons at 4 o'clock. We get right down to business here on 790 KABC, streaming live online worldwide at KBC.com, and you're on demand. Mottek On Money podcast at KBC.com, Apple, iTunes, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Well, more wearing of the green on Wall Street on this day after St. Patrick's Day. Stocks finishing higher today, snapping a three-day losing streak last week for the S&P 500 and NASDAQ. The next big event for investors is this week with the Federal Reserve holding a two-day meeting this week starting tomorrow. They'll be wrapping up on Wednesday with a decision on interest rates, a statement on the economy, and then a full-blown news conference from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. All this expected to shed light on prospects for rate cuts later this year. The market has been rallying, of course, in anticipation of a cut at some point. The Dow coming in today for a closing gain of 76 points. The S&P 500 moved up 32, and the NASDAQ closed up 130 points. Investors this week not only focus on the Fed, but also the banking officials in Japan. The Bank of Japan seen as likely to end its negative interest rate policy tomorrow, while Wednesday our Fed here could reduce its projection for interest rate cuts this year. The February Consumer Price Index and the Producer Price Index both came in hotter than expected last week, as we told you right here. Of course, the inflation numbers are watched very closely by the Federal Reserve, as are the job numbers, which also came out recently. The S&P 500 suffered its first back-to-back weekly losses last week, but also hit a record high for the ninth week in a row. We are watching what's happening on the interest rate scene here with the yield on the 10-year note, which impacts fixed-rate mortgage rates, among other things, hitting the highest we've seen since last November, now at 4.33%. Fed funds futures, meanwhile, have priced in a lower probability of a June rate cut, but still see the prospects of such a move as slightly better than 50-50, according to the CME Fed Watch tool, which we also watch here. Fed at this point overwhelmingly expected to leave interest rates unchanged when it wraps up that two-day meeting this week. Investors will pay close attention to what they call the dot plot, a graph which represents individual policymakers' expectations for interest rates and part of the Fed's quarterly summary of economic projections. Taking a look at what else is happening here, we see the price of oil suddenly hitting a new high for the year, highest seen since actually in 5 months. And yes, the highest, of course, here in 2024, up another 5 cents right now at $82.77 a barrel. This has tensions continue to rise in the Middle East. The price of gold, which hit a record high recently, right now hovering at $2,164.40 an ounce, up 10 cents here at the moment. One bright spot on the economy today, builder confidence. Home builder confidence rose for the fourth month in a row in the month of March this month, as home buyer demand remains strong, according to a new report out today from the National Association of Home Builders. The expectations of a jump in demand in the coming months push that monthly confidence index up 3 points to a 51 reading in the month of March. Among the stocks in focus today, we see shares of Alphabet, Google moving up nearly 5% on a report that Apple might license Google's Gemini artificial intelligence engine and use it in the iPhone. Apple shares moved up about 0.5% on that news. Of course, NVIDIA back in the news here, hitting record highs recently, and on a tear, began its annual developers conference with a keynote from the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, getting underway just as markets closed this afternoon. NVIDIA shares moved up nearly 1% today. The stock is now soared about 77% this year and is up 239% over the past year. A retired Goldman Sachs Group banker, Stephen Scher, is now stepping down as CEO of Hertz Global Holdings at the end of this month. He'll be succeeded by Gil West, who served as chief operating officer at Delta Airlines and the general manager of GM's Cruise autonomous driving unit. Hertz shares moved lower today by about 6%. Today is day 163 of the Israel-Hamas war, which broke out after Israel was attacked by Hamas terrorists last October 7th, killing at least 1,200 people, and they took another 250 hostage. Hamas is still believed to be holding about 100 hostages, as well as the remains of 30 others. Today, the White House confirmed reports that Israel has killed a top Hamas commander. That's the day after President Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as tensions escalate between the U.S. and Israel on the direction of the war. Later this hour, I'll be joined by Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action Agenda for the Simon Wiesenthal Center and Museum of Tolerance in West Los Angeles. He's also currently serving as chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and has just returned from Saudi Arabia. Something happened during his visit to Saudi Arabia. Rabbi Cooper will be joining us live later to tell us what happened, and of course we'll get his assessment of what's happening with the war between Israel and Hamas. We'll also get an update on the latest tensions involving the U.S. and China with Gordon Chang, a China expert who's our go-to guy on all things China. We'll be talking about what's happening with TikTok as well as tensions involving Taiwan. So we will get the very latest on what's happening around the world. We're also watching what's happening with China facing a new sea dispute with another neighbor, Vietnam, this time around. I don't know if you saw this report. Newsweek, among those reporting that Vietnam has now called on China to abide by maritime law after Beijing declared earlier this month that it was expanding its territorial claims with a new baseline in the South China Sea's Gulf of Tonkin. The Chinese Foreign Ministry's Department of Boundary and Ocean Affairs said the move was consistent with Chinese and international law and necessary for the exercise of national sovereignty and jurisdiction. Newsweek is reporting China's expansive claims over most of the South China Sea overlap with those of Vietnam and several other coastal states. China's already locked in a years-long and escalating dispute with the Philippines over features within the U.S. allies' exclusive economic zone. Baselines are used to determine the width of waters a country can claim full jurisdiction over. Extending 12 nautical miles beyond baselines are a country's territorial waters where foreign vessels are generally accorded the right of passage. Lying within the baselines are internal waters where foreign vessels are denied this right. According to a Vietnamese Foreign Ministry spokesman, Vietnam is of the view that the coastal states are obligated to comply with the 1982 Convention of the Law of the Sea in establishing their baselines for measuring the breadth of the territorial sea and ensure that those baselines do not affect the legitimate rights and interests of other states. So suddenly, China and Vietnam locking horns. We'll get an assessment of that situation. And there were some stories also related to the Philippines and China locking horns over the South China Sea claim as Secretary of State Blinken headed to the Philippines to repeat a U.S. commitment to its regional partner, the Philippines. Secretary of State Blinken set the touchdown in the Philippines today as tensions between Beijing and, let's see if we can get the latest on that. And we'll continue to follow that story as well. And, of course, on Taiwan, Gordon Chang, an expert on what's happening between China and Taiwan and its impact on U.S.-China relations. So we see Beijing now criticizing South Korea for inviting Taiwan to a democracy summit. Representatives from Taipei have been included in all three summits, which were begun by President Biden in 2021, and mainland China has been excluded. We'll find out what we need to know about that. At the opening of the three-day conference in Seoul, Secretary of State Blinken accused China and Russia of conducting malicious propaganda campaigns. China lashing out at South Korea for hosting the summit for democracy and inviting Taiwan to take part in that conference. What else is happening? Well, let's take a look here. The price of silver. We've been watching that one quietly move higher. It doesn't get as much attention as some of the other things we follow. But silver right now has been moving up above $25 an ounce, right now at $25.23 an ounce. We're also, as I mentioned at the beginning, watching what's happening with the economy very closely, with the Federal Reserve set to start a two-day policy-setting meeting tomorrow and wrapping up on Wednesday. Let's get the latest on your money, the markets, and the economy now with an assessment from economist Stephen Moore, FreedomWorks Senior Economic Advisor and co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. Stephen Moore, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon. Stephen Moore, great to have you with us. Stephen, are you there?
Yeah.
Stephen, it's been a while
Hello.
since we've chatted behind live microphones, so give us your assessment of things here at the moment.
You mean with the economy, or?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, look, I think that this economy is kind of struggling, actually. If you look at the latest data, the average family is still about $2,000 poorer than they were when Trump left office. We're seeing a bit of a resurgence in inflation. Look what's happened to gas prices. Commodity prices are rising. We're at 4 to 5% inflation right now, which is way above the 1.5% inflation that we saw under Donald J. Trump. And then you got the problem of, a surging national debt, a surge in the amount of debt that, credit card debt that families are facing. So, sorry, I'm not buying it. I don't think this economy, I'm with the 2/3 of Americans who rate the economy as either fair or good, not great.
We did see your posting today on X, formerly known as Twitter, that noted under President Biden, American households have seen stalled incomes and family net worth. The Fed report revealing an 18% rise in household net wealth. In real terms, it's less than 1%. And under President Trump, nominal wealth increased by nearly 38% and a real increase of nearly 28%. So pretty big difference. And as we saw in the presidential primary here in California recently, and of course the election here, economy was the number one topic for the folks. Not a big surprise.
Not a big surprise at all. And, those statistics that you just cited are true, that, people say, oh, the booming stock market. Well, the stock market has been strong, but guess what? When you have 20% inflation and you have a 22% increase in the stock market, that means your after tax, after return, after inflation return is like 2 or 3% under Biden, whereas under Trump, it was about 25%. So much, much higher. People did much better, both in terms of their 401k plans, their real incomes, their purchasing power, and their ability to pay off their debts. I'll give you one other statistic that I find alarming is that, the average mortgage payment on a 30-year mortgage when Trump was president was, about, $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a month. Now it's about $2,500 a month. So almost an 80% increase in the mortgage payments that people have to pay. And I don't think that's fully considered in the consumer price index.
Absolutely. And a lot of people feel like it's a recession, even though officially we were expecting a recession all of last year, and officially it didn't happen. And this year, a lot of nervousness about what turns this economy might take. What is your feeling? By the way, here in Los Angeles, the LADC recently published its economic forecast, and they see sluggish growth here of about 1% here for this big region, which is the second largest economy in the United States. So give us your assessment of where things go from here.
Well, if you haven't seen, the latest census data, Los Angeles County lost, they were in the top 5 in terms of lost population last year. And, meanwhile, the people are going to Houston, people are going to Austin, people are going to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, they're going to Miami, they're going to Tampa, they're going to, Charleston, South Carolina. So California and Los Angeles, which used to attract people, is now, repelling people because of high taxes, high crime, out of control, illegal immigration, all the problems that are associated with, the Biden administration. So I think if you live in Los Angeles, you've got to be really concerned about the direction that things are going in that whole metropolitan area. Excellent
point. And of course, we are seeing credit card rates pretty much a 20-year high, rates stubbornly high, and as the Fed tries to cool this economy even more. And we're going to get another sign of what's going to happen this week when the Fed wraps up a 2-day policy setting meeting. And what do you think is going to happen on Wednesday? And what is your outlook for interest rates at this point?
Well, the Wall Street is betting that they'll hold firm, but maybe cut rates later in the spring. As I look at the numbers, I just said, we got 4 to 5% inflation. We got rising commodity prices are rising about twice that fast. And, when the price of oil and gas and, coal and copper and, wheat are rising, guess what? That means that's going to filter into rising consumer prices with a bit of a lag. So I'm sorry, I don't think we've slayed the inflation dragon. I wish we had. I'm not rooting against the American economy, but I'm just looking at the facts and the statistics. and they show that these prices are continuing to rise. So somebody's got to show me how the Fed could possibly be cutting interest rates when inflation is back upward. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. If anything, they should be raising rates. I'm not endorsing that. I'm just saying maybe now they should just hold firm until we get this inflation under control. And, the target rate for inflation by the Fed is about 2%, which I think is an appropriate number because you don't want to have deflation. But, now they're saying, oh, maybe we should make the target rate 3%, which is like, dumbing down the test because they can't get it down to 2%. Well, if they set the rate at 3%, then we're going to have 6% inflation. So I think we've got to be very serious about two things: bringing inflation down and dramatically cutting spending and debt in Washington, government spending. Government spending is expected to grow by another $100 to $200 billion next year. These are enormous numbers. We're talking about, $2 trillion of annual debt. Everyone knows that it's sinful how much we're borrowing. You can't, it's like going out on a drinking binge and saying, gee, doesn't this feel good? And then you can't get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah. And what about the rematch coming up here, it looks like, between President Trump and President Biden here? And looks like there's a big difference of opinion on the direction of taxes here, with the president laying out his plan in the State of the Union speech recently. And President Trump, of course, has different ideas. Why don't you contrast that for us here?
Well, it's Venus and Mars, isn't it? It couldn't possibly, couldn't have a wider difference between what Biden wants to do and what Trump wants to do. And I'll give Joe Biden credit. In the State of the Union, he was very, very clear about what he wanted to do. He wants to massively raise taxes. He wants to massively raise government spending and debt. He sees, we should subsidize more industries. We should have more welfare payments, expand the, more and more student debt paid for by the taxpayer. All of these things are really dramatically negative for the economy. And by the way, this would be the biggest tax increase ever. You'd have taxes on investment be reaching something like 60% or more. Who's going to invest in this country if the government's going to take over half of the money you make if your investment pays off? I mean, you'd do better in playing the slots in Las Vegas.
And our rate would be even higher than China. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. The business tax rate. That's a good point you're making. That the business tax rate, when you include state and local, would go up to about 33%, and China is at, I think China's at 25% and Russia's at 20%. So what's wrong with that picture? We're going to have a higher tax on our businesses than Russia and China, that are, communist and a socialist country.
Isn't that something? Well, speaks for itself. Economist Stephen Moore, thank you very much for taking the call live with us here this afternoon. Look forward to more conversations with you as we follow all this very closely. Economist Stephen Moore, FreedomWorks Senior Economic Advisor and co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. Thank you very much for taking the call live with us here this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Anytime.
Right out to the freeways now here on 790 KBC. Friends, people like you and me have our ear to the ground on all things business. We like to be informed and indeed well prepared. As important as finance is, I want you to have a plan in case you're hit by someone not paying attention to the road. Thinking ahead serves us well. Even still, we can get caught off guard as people are so focused on their destination that they might not have a plan in place in case they're in an accident that's not their fault. That's why I encourage you to put my friend Attorney Clark Fielding's number in your phone. That number is 833-88-SHARK. So if you're hurt in an accident, you'll be ready with your strategy to make Clark Fielding your very first call. Fielding Law aims for the highest possible settlements, considering you might need long-term care, rehab, compensation for lost wages, and any ongoing physical or emotional pain. So if you're hurt in any kind of accident, call for a free consultation with Fielding Law. You can trust them. They're honest, respected, and your strategy in case you get into that unexpected accident. Motorcycle, truck, pedestrian, scooter, hit and run, boating, or bike accidents, you name it. The number to call, 833-88-SHARK. That's 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. 790 KBC welcomes Dweezil Zappa coming to the Orpheum Theater on August 3rd. Tickets are on sale now at Ticketmaster.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Call right now, 1-888-795-2222 for tickets to see Dweezil Zappa. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. winning day on Wall Street to kick off the new week. We see the Dow coming in for a closing gain of 76 points to 38,790. There's our favorite number, 790. The S&P 500 of 32 at 5,149. And the NASDAQ gained 130 points at 16,103. The yield in the 10-year note has shot up to 4.33%. That's the highest we've seen since last November. Tesla shares getting a boost today, up 6%. Google up nearly 5%. We see NVIDIA up $6 today to $8.84 and change. The price of oil is at the highest we've seen in 5 months, of 5 cents now at $82.77. The price of gold of 10 cents at $2,164.40. Taking a look at the cryptos, a reminder that, they go up as well as down. Bitcoin down about 500 now, back to 67,799. We see Ethereum down about 100 at 3,544, and Doge at the moment at 14 cents. Looks like we have another bankruptcy in the retail world with fabric and crafts retailer Joann. You probably saw that store in the malls out there, filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protections. Consumers continue to cut back on discretionary spending and some pandemic-era hobbies. The Ohio-based company said it expected to emerge from bankruptcy as early as the end of next month, and following this process, Joann will likely become privately owned by certain lenders and industry parties. The company added, meaning its shares, Joan, would no longer be publicly traded on stock exchanges, according to MarketWatch. And now the latest news for you here in 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. Today is day 163 of the Israel-Hamas war, which broke out after Israel was attacked by Hamas terrorists last October 7th, killing at least 1,200 people. The terrorists took 250 people hostage. Hamas is still believed to be holding about 100 hostages, as well as the remains of 30 others. Today, the White House confirmed reports that Israel has killed a top Hamas commander. This day after President Biden spoke to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as tensions escalate between the U.S. and Israel on the direction of the war. The Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles has joined dozens of other Jewish organizations urging California regents to take action to address anti-Semitism on California's public university campuses. And the Simon Wiesenthal Center has also urged Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer to respect Israeli democracy and withdraw his call to remove Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Joining us live now is Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action Agenda for the Simon Wiesenthal Center in West Los Angeles. Rabbi Cooper, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
My honor speaking to you from Washington today.
Thank you very much. It's our honor to have you live with us and give us an update on what's happening there.
Well, I'm right now I'm the chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. We have our monthly meeting tomorrow. But last week I was in Saudi Arabia as heading our commission's visit there, and came into quite a remarkable situation, which I was informed by an official of the foreign ministry, that I would have to take off my yarmulke, my kippah, because according to him, in Saudi Arabia, no religious symbols of any other faith can be displayed publicly in that country. And I tried to explain to the person who made this demand that I was actually there on behalf of the United States government on the issue of religious freedom. So we actually cut short our visit to Saudi Arabia in protest, and I'm still hoping to go back in the next couple of weeks. But of course, the bigger news here out of Washington was Chuck Schumer, Senator Schumer's speech on the floor of the Senate, quite remarkable, essentially calling for the removal of a democratically elected prime minister of a top ally, in this case, the state of Israel. And a comment by President Biden afterwards that he thought it was a good speech. If the intention was to sort of ratchet up pressure on the Israeli government to take a particular approach on the military situation right now in Gaza, all he succeeded in doing is essentially forcing people who are opposed to Netanyahu, who want his job, to all, of course, support him, because Israel is a democracy, and just like we don't like being pushed around, bullied even by friends, it had the exact opposite effect. So it's kind of difficult to really read what the United States policy is right now in terms of foreign policy in many, many arenas. But right now, with still, we hope, 100 Israeli hostages who may still be alive, and with a lot of the Hamas fighters finally cornered, this is a time that Israelis, again, whatever their political ideologies are, generally supportive of the Israeli sort of coalition government. And while no one knows for sure how we can free the rest of the hostages or if that's going to be possible, Bibi Netanyahu is convinced that only military pressure will bring that about. So a lot of American Jewish leaders were, myself included, were just stunned by the speech, by its tone. And I think that anyone who knows Politics 101 anywhere in the world, that kind of approach to a friend and an ally, especially if it's a democracy, will always have the opposite effect. Things will really boomerang. So, it's a very, I have to say, it's a very, what's going on in Israel, what's going on in Gaza, it's a very personal situation for many families here in Southern California, Jewish, and also some of the Palestinian families. And we all, have to pray and hope that this particular brutal situation will come to an end. And I think that most American Jews agree with Netanyahu. When you're dealing with these kinds of terrorists, you can't negotiate with the people who, mass murderers, mass rapists, mass kidnappers, et cetera, et cetera. We're dealing with a Hamas leadership that just has a different worldview, an inhumane one, in which they don't mind using their own citizens in Gaza as cannon fodder for, hiding behind them as Israel tries to put an end to their reign of terror.
On the Air Live with Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action for the Simon Wiesenthal Center in West Los Angeles, coming to us from Washington. I noted at the beginning of this program you do serve as chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and basically had that tremendous insult there in Saudi Arabia. Tell us exactly what happened and how you called that meeting off after they insisted that you remove your yarmulke.
Well, the visit started in a very positive way. We had a 2-hour meeting with the president of the Saudi Arabian Human Rights Commission, by the way, a woman. The changes there socially, you can see, are quite dramatic. And I think there are other people who are not yet ready for those changes. On the first evening that our group was there, we were the guests of the Foreign Ministry in a place called Diriyah. It's a UNESCO site that is essentially ancient Riyadh. Very beautiful place. We're about 20% through this massive area being taken with a tour guide when I received a phone call from someone, I assumed from the Foreign Ministry, who said, you have to take off your kippah. And I said, you understand that when you ask me to do something like that, it's like asking someone in Saudi Arabia to take off her hijab. And I said, 50 years ago, I spent a month in the Soviet Union. I didn't take off my kippah then, and I'm not going to take it off now. Please check back with your superiors to make sure that that's your... I'm also the chair of International Religious Commission that looks at 28 nations, including Saudi Arabia, in which write up an annual report for the Secretary of State, for Congress, and for the President of the United States. And sure enough, a few minutes later, call came back and said, no, you have to take off your kippah. If you won't, you'll be escorted out. And so I said, well, if that's what you're asking, even though you're the folks who invited us here, then yes, I will leave, and then I will be leaving because I can't do my work on behalf of the commission in these kinds of circumstances. And Frank, the vice chair of USERF, which is the acronym for our group, Pastor Fred Davey, African-American, Union Theological Seminary, fellow New Yorker, a Democratic, very much involved in Democratic politics on the East Coast. Within 10 seconds of hearing what happened, he said, "I'm out of here. I'm leaving with Rabbi Cooper." And so all 5 members eventually, we left. We came together and we left together. The good news is that I think that this call was made by people who are sort of stunned by the changes that are being wrought in terms of the theological approach and training, in terms of trying to bring, I think their goal is the year 2030, where they want to have a new Saudi Arabia. And I think that the people who made the call wanted to make things more difficult for MBS. And sure enough, within 2 or 3 days of our return, I learned that I've already been invited to come back to Saudi Arabia. And I think after Ramadan and probably after Passover, I look forward to going and finishing what we started there. So, these are very tough times in the Middle East. It's very difficult to stay positive about hopes for a peaceful future for our children and grandchildren. But the fact that we are Americans and we have these kinds of opportunities, we have to utilize them. And I just think the main message, though, in this case was that respect is a two-way street.
So, sorry you had to endure that, Rabbi Cooper, and I wish we had more time here now to continue our conversation, but know that you have an open line and look forward to speaking with you again very soon on everything that we just touched on here today. And we wish you all the best in your important work. Rabbi Abraham Cooper, the Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action Agenda for the Simon Wiesenthal Center in West Los Angeles. Look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Safe travels to you, and thank you very much for coming to the line here today.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Likewise, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, live with us on the air on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. What's next for TikTok after the House passed a bill mandating a sale by the app's Chinese owner ByteDance or be banned in the United States? Let's get an update on that and the latest tensions involving the U.S. and China. Joining us live now is Gordon Chang, China expert and author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War, and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon Chang, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Frank.
All right, on the TikTok story, the House passing that bill mandating the sale of TikTok by its Chinese owner. What's the likelihood of this ultimately happening?
I think the likelihood is high. The question is whether it will happen before the November 5th election. But I think the American people more or less want this, and I think that's the pressure that's going to be brought to bear. Also, the Chinese are going to engage in provocative behavior. I think they're going to make themselves appear even less attractive to the American people. So Beijing is going to be pushing this, unintentionally, of course, but I think that's where they're going. And President Biden said he's going to sign it, and most of the Senate committee members who are going to look at this, they have signaled that they like it as well.
On there live with Gordon Chang, a China expert, and now influencers are scrambling to find other platforms if this happens, right? Tell us about the importance of this, and you, of course, have flagged TikTok for quite some time, given the fact that it's owned by China, and you've expressed concerns about this all along.
Well, yes, because China has used TikTok for two things that are injurious to our national security. One of them is stealing the data of 170 million users. But more important is China's use of the curation algorithm to boost the signal on dangerous content. And some of that content has actually been very provocative. So, for instance, in August of 2020, Radio Free Asia reported that an intelligence unit of the People's Liberation Army based themselves in China's Houston consulate. And there they used big data to identify Americans likely to participate in violent protests. And then they sent them tailor-made TikTok videos on how to riot. And that, of course, is a violation of federal law. It's also an act of war. And that was TikTok.
take us around the horn here on all things that are creating these new tensions now between the U.S. and China, and also China and Vietnam locking horns as well.
Well, what we see, of course, is that China has been probing its neighbors. And it's not just Vietnam. It's been the Philippines most recently, and then, of course, Taiwan, Japan, and India. So China is going against most of its neighbors to its south and to its east. And the Vietnamese, for hundreds of years, have been at loggerheads with the Chinese. The last war that China fought was actually against Vietnam in 1979. Since that time, there have been so many incidents in the South China Sea, in the Paracels, the archipelago in the northern part of the South China Sea. So this is going to continue for quite some time.
All right. What is the latest involving Taiwan? We've seen some additional news regarding China and Taiwan recently. What stands out to you on that? Well,
in Kinmen, which is about 3 or 4 nautical miles from the main Chinese island, Chinese mainland, Kinmen is an island of Taiwan. China has been sending its Coast Guard into sovereign Taiwan waters. Also, we know from reporting of about a week and a half or so ago that U.S. forces are permanently stationed on Kinmen as trainers for the Taiwanese military. And that means that any move against Kinmen is going to involve Americans. And of course, that brings us into the fight very quickly.
You have Chinese ships attempting to block Philippines supply ships, so we're watching that situation as well.
That is actually, I think, the most dangerous because the United States has continually issued written and oral warnings to China that we are prepared to use force to defend our treaty ally, the Philippines. And China keeps on ignoring those warnings. The most recent one was March 5 from the State Department, and China just doesn't seem to care, which means that deterrence has broken down, which means that there could be an incident there that spirals out of control.
Gordon, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon. That is China expert Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War, and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, look forward to staying in touch with you on all these important matters, and thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon.
Thanks, Frank.
Taking a look at the market action here to wrap up the day. The Dow closing higher by 76 points. More wearing of the green coming off of the St. Paddy's Day holiday weekend. We're at 38,790 for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The S&P 500 moved up 32, about 5,149, and the NASDAQ up 130 at 16,103. All the major averages just below record highs. The yield in the 10-year note is shot higher, the highest we've seen since last November. That's the one that impacts important rates like fixed-rate mortgage rates. It's now back to 4.33%. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang. I'll be back tomorrow at 4 with Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
Are you ready for hard-hitting observations?
Reality remains reality no matter how hard you try to ignore it.
The Ben Shapiro Show brings you all the news you need to know in America today.
Again, I'm all here for the pop culture, people dating each other for the press.
Ben breaks down the culture and never gives an inch.
Every so often, and by every so often I mean literally every 27 seconds so the producer gets fired.
The Ben Shapiro Show on YouTube or wherever you listen.